I want to give a huge thanks to PTCGO Store for sponsoring the channel. PTCGO Store is a great website where you can get codes for the Pokemon trading card game online at some of the best prices. Of course, now able to order Sword and Shield base set codes. You can use code CHIP5 at checkout to get 5% off your order, or click the link in my description below. Once again, that is code CHIP5 to get 5% off your order. Thanks, PTCGO Store. What's going on, guys? Chip here. Welcome back to another Pokemon TCG video. This is going to be a meta discussion about the current standard format. Of course, Toronto Regionals is this weekend, so we're going to be mostly talking about Toronto Regionals, but, you know, this is going to be some great information if you've got League Cups, League Challenges, whatever's going on in your area this weekend. And I've got three great guests to join us. We got Will, Jenkins, John Ang, and Frank Percic. So I'm going to ask these guys to introduce themselves, give us, you know, a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what is a favorite deck of yours that you have played in the past. So we'll go Will, John, and then Frank.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Will. I play out of the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia area. I've been playing for about 5 years, top 8 2 regionals this season, and my favorite deck of all time is Decidueye Vileplume with Trevenant Dusknoir right behind it.
He loves, you know, very fair decks, it seems. Okay. John, how's it going, man?
All right, what's up? I'm John. I'm also from the DMV area out of Maryland. I'm at 1200 something CP this season, so it's been pretty fortunate to do so well. And my favorite deck of all time is probably Darkrai Mewtwo, like throwing it back to 2012.
Ooh, a big throwback.
Yeah.
You were like a junior.
Oh, yeah.
All right, and Frank, how's it going, man?
Good. Yeah, my name's Frank, everybody. I'm out of Cleveland, Ohio, Northeast Ohio area, and I also play Pokemon. My favorite deck, probably, this is going to be kind of boring, but expanded Giratina, Coco, that deck, Giratina Eggs, Roxy.
Yeah.
It's probably my favorite deck I've ever played in my entire life. That was the funnest tournament I've ever had.
Yeah, for sure. That's, of course, the deck Hunter used to win Dallas Regionals, and Frank got top 16 of that tournament as well. The deck was super good for that tournament, and definitely a really cool one. So, yeah, all three of these guys have had a lot of success this season. Frank's coming off of 2 top 16s in a row. Will coming off of top 8. John, of course, getting top 4 earlier on this year in Knoxville and getting another. You top 8'd once more this year, right? And
second Knoxville, top 4 Dallas.
Okay, that's right. So yeah, these guys have had tons of success this year, so I thought it would be a great group for us to discuss standard and where things are at right now heading into Toronto. So we're going to be mostly looking at results from the Malmo Regional Championships, which took place in Sweden this past weekend. Of course, that Tord Reklev ended up winning with Arceus Dialga, Palkia, and Zacian V, and then also the internationals in Melbourne a few weeks ago. So right off the bat, I think the first thing we've got to talk about is going to be ADP Zacian. I think undisputed most popular deck in the format, definitely very high contender, if not undisputed best deck in the format. Would anyone here dispute that it would be considered BDIF right now?
It's
Absolutely not. Yeah,
yeah.
there's
So
no questioning that.
no questioning. Yeah. So there's actually kind of been two variations kind of popping around right now, and I'm also going to be kind of referencing some questions we got from Twitter tonight as we go through things. So in relation to Zacian ADP, Mia asks, with Zacian ADP poised to continue its rampage as BDIF, do the guests have any preferences on the 2 major variants of this deck presented in top 4 of Malmo? Tag Call with Guzmahala versus Spinner and Dedenne. Does anyone feel that we'll see another major variation crop up in response? So those are kind of the 2 versions it seems like people have been committing to. Of course, Tord did win with the Spinner Dedenne, but Tag Call Guzmahala I feel like has been the more popular, more played version. That might change now that Tord has won with this other version. So I don't know. What are you guys' kind of general thoughts between those 2 versions of the deck? Which do you prefer? We can start with Will.
So I've tested both, not towards list though. When I was in Australia, I was testing the tag call version, and I just hated how it worked because I think one of the main arguments as to why tag call is like okay in comparison to the spinner version is when you play tag call and then you Guzma Hala, you're likely going to have to grab Aurora energy, and if you don't, you're grabbing unit, but most of the time you grab Aurora. So that means you have to discard 3 cards from your hand to activate Guzma Hala and then to activate the Aurora energy, and sometimes your hand can't handle that, or it can handle it and you just set yourself up with a super weak 1-2 whatever card hand. So that's one of the like biggest gripes I think about the tag call version. And then while I was in Australia, I learned that I didn't like the tag call engine as much, so I dropped them all for cherish balls and stuff. And it was similar to Towards List, but not exactly. And I messed around with that and liked it a little bit, but I ended up going back to the tag call version because I thought it was safer. But now seeing Tord win a regional with the spinner version, I think that that's the better version right now.
Sure. John, what are your thoughts?
I agree. Tor's version is definitely a lot better. One of the other things I dislike about tag call is it's a little bit more consistent at getting like the turn 2 like alter creation and stuff like that, because you have like a direct search for like Guzma Hala and whatnot for like everything you need, like the skateboard and start dodging and stuff like that. But the other problem I have with it is tag call and all those other cards are pretty like just dead past the turn 2. They don't really do anything in the mid game. So. Sure. Towards definitely is just like an overall just like better list, considering like the cards are good at like every stage of the game as opposed to just like early with the tag call engine.
For sure.
So
yeah,
Frank. if we're just speaking on those two like separate variants, I agree with the point that the Aurora like special energy tag call version with Guzma Hala is, like you said, the safer play and like the more kind of consistent version. And I think if you're trying to like consistently just get the turn 2 Guzma Hala off every game, it's kind of worth like discarding, like getting your hand low, just because you play Jirachi and like Professor's Research and stuff like that. Because normally what'll happen is you'll like get this like turn 2 alter creation off, and then just next turn you'll set up like Professor's Research with like your 2 cards left in hand. And like with a Rangaroo kind of being able to like manipulate your top deck and stuff like that. Like if you have like a good hand and there, there's something you have to go down to a 0 card hand, but there's something like you don't want to discard, you can kind of like throw it back in or etc. And so I think that is like the ideal version for like what the deck wants to do. But at the same time, I think with like the Energy Spinner version and Cherish Ball and Dedenne and Acro Bikes and stuff like that, it just, like you said, draws more cards and kind of goes through the deck faster and just like can execute the main strategy past like your turn 2 alter creation more often. And I think that's like kind of what you need to like win a tournament, right? If it's nice to be safe and consistent, but if you're gonna go 14 rounds and win a tournament, you need to draw well. Like that's what it comes down to. And I think that's the deck that if you draw well, you just can win every single one of your games. And I think that's like what it took to win a regional.
Sure. And actually, continuing on ADP Zacian, we saw in Towards List, he did choose to include the copy of Resource Management of Rangaroo. I imagine this is in here as like a counter to any sort of mill strategies, getting back your catchers and stuff like that to get around the dolls. And also looking at Brian's top 4 list, he included a copy of Mawile GX. So it seems like a couple of different techs have kind of been popping up here and there. And then also Tord playing, of course, the... So Tord playing the 4 custom catcher plus 1 great catcher, which kind of seems like the standard. But then also Pedro Torres got, I think, just top 32, maybe top 16 with a version that played 4 custom catchers and 4 regular Pokemon catchers. So just like gonna gust something every single turn, like chasing stuff down. What are you guys' thoughts on those 2 tech Pokemon, Resource Management Rangaroo and Mawile GX, and then also on the gusting cards in the deck, custom catchers, great catcher, and Pokemon catcher? We'll start with John on this one.
So to start with, props to Pedro, because that deck goes hard. All the flip cards, you have like scoop ups in there too.
Yeah.
As for the Mawile, my group actually thought of the Mawile before the tournament. We thought it was like the greatest idea ever for like Obstagoon to like counter the whole Virizion GX play, put everything back down.
Yeah.
We were pleasantly surprised when Pedro opened with it on stream. And I definitely think Mawile is good because I think Obstagoon is still going to be played come time Toronto. It's probably not going to be as big as it was before, but I think it's still going to hover around there. As for the resource management Oranguru, in Tord's list specifically, it's just like it's good against Mill. It's good to get back your catchers for like so you have a shot against Obstagoon because he didn't have Mawile, right? Tord didn't.
Tor did not know.
Yeah, Tor didn't have Mawile, so that gives you like a shot against Obstagoon or like a tiny one with the Oranguru. So yeah, if I were to play ADP going into Toronto, I'd probably keep them all while, and I don't think I would have the resource management or Angry. I also think even Tord was like this card was like useless.
Okay.
He was talking about his tournament run.
Interesting. Okay, Frank, thoughts?
I also would definitely advise against the resource management. I think it's okay, but I think with ADP, the whole point of the deck is to like attack 3 times and win. And so, if you're using resource management and stuff like that, it's not really your deck kind of just tapers out after a while, even if you're playing against like Mill or something like that where you're not taking damage. I think the Mawile is definitely superior. It also really fixes your, like you're saying, the Obstagoon matchup because they pick them all up with the problem with Obstagoon is because even though you can catcher around them, if you play 4 Pokemon catcher with coin flips and custom catcher and stuff like that, you still have the problem of them using Virizian's GX attack and just getting a lone Obstagoon and using Obstruct. So kind of to mitigate that, you want to play the Mawile that can just put all their Pokemon back down, and you can then send them, up with catchers and custom catchers and Pokemon catcher. But the thing with like Mill and Dolls and stuff like that, you can only do that so many times. And if they ever mill like one of your custom catchers, because there's only playing one great catcher and 4 custom catchers. So the thing is, like, they mill one of your custom catchers, you get pretty much 1 gusting effect, which isn't enough to really deal with somebody sending a Lily's Pokédoll at you every turn. And that's where I like the Fion is something that a lot of people are playing, where you can just like send the doll back, and if they put 2 dolls down, you can always catch her around it, and just hopefully before they set up, you can pull off a play where you like Fion and take up a Pokemon for 2 prizes, and then use both sets of custom catchers for your prizes 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6. So I don't think the Mawile is enough to deal with like these mill install decks, especially when you look at Sanders' top 4 list, where he's like really heavily doing like Energy Nile and like more control stuff than just straight like Belba and Bryson Man mill. So I'm like not a huge fan of the Mawile in that sense. It just depends on like what decks you're expecting to play. And on a personal note, I would much rather have a better mill matchup and stall matchup than I would Obstagoon like going into Toronto.
Okay, for sure. Will, anything to add?
Similar to John, I with the Mawile, except with the Guru, I came up with the Guru right before a league challenge that I played in this past Saturday because I was thinking about it, and I had lost to Mill off of them hitting my custom catchers or whatever, and I was just like, you know what, that's kind of annoying. So I figured I would try the Guru if I hit any Mill, and I played 1 game with it before knowing Tord had put it in his deck, and it allowed me to win. And I was like, well, it accomplished what I want, and it's kind of just like a saver in that matchup because sometimes you can get bad starts or whatever. You miss a switch, you can't turn 2 GX, they hit Crushing Hammer, they get rid of your energy. So the Guru allows you to like come back into that game, and I think that as long as you have your resources, you can win that matchup. So the Guru kind of mitigates them just hitting your resources. So I do like the Guru. The Mawile, I think the Mawile is all right. I like that it's for goons, and then I think it also pairs well with the resource management. If you prize a custom catcher or something against goons, you can use that to recycle them. And I hit an Obstagoon with both cards in my deck, and he ended up benching too many Pokemon and didn't play Virizion, so that didn't matter. But I was able to use customs more than once because I had prized a set of them, so the Guru helped me win that way. So I do like the Guru. I'm okay on Mawile, and yeah.
For sure. Okay. Cool. So hopefully that's some good info for you guys about ADP Zacian. I guess kind of looking at the second part of Mia's question, do our guests see, does anyone feel that we'll see yet another major variation prop up in response? So do you guys feel like people are going to stick to one of these 2 versions of the deck, or do you think there's room to innovate still with ADP Zacian? Frank, you kick us off here.
Yeah, I think one thing that we haven't really seen a lot of yet is a stage 1 just text into these decks, because you think about expanded and with cards like Burning Shadows, Vileplume, and Pyroar and things like that. A lot of decks will tech in like a 1/1 stage 1 line, like Turbo Dark for a while was doing like the 1/1 Weavile, and when we played Giratina Rocks, we put in the 1/1 Noivern. And so I think like a deck that maybe puts in like a stage 1 into the ADP deck, like a Copper or something like that, could be good to like deal with Obstagoon. One thing that I'd seen, I think somebody top 4 to League Cup or top 8 to League Cup with Alolan Ninetales, and I heard there are some players like in Australia that played like a small Alolan Ninetales GX line in their ADP decks, and I think that could be really good because you can not only like use the ability, but also you can kind of damage Obstagoon, and then you can kind of like hit multiple dolls at one time. So I think that's like something that people could put in the deck. It's something I've tested a little bit of as well, and I think that's pretty good. So I think that could be like another archetype we see come out as like this ADP deck with a 1/1 stage 1 line teched in there somewhere.
Okay, interesting. Will, you got anything you think could pop up?
Sure. I think that for ADP mirror, or I think ADP mirror is going to be super huge. So your
Sure.
ADP deck should have an edge against mirror if you can make one. And I think some of the best ways to do that are making your Pokemon more tanky. I know some of the Japanese players that came to Australia or through their streams were testing Metal Core Barrier. I'm not sure how effective this is, but I know from playing ADP mirror a lot that it's very important to gust and knock out the opponent's Zacian before they knock out your Zacian. So if you can prevent that from happening, that could possibly swing your mirror. Big Charm and Chaotic Swell also seem pretty decent to prevent what's Shrine of Punishment from coming into play, damaging your ADP, making it so that it can get knocked out. So if you have a Swell and a Big Charm on your ADP, it's going to be super hard for your opponent to damage said ADP. So you can then like gust a 1 prizer with the GX, make it 2, and then knock out their ADP, which they might not expect because they can't make it more tanky.
Yeah, I feel like Big Charm also like can be really useful on ADP for like the Mewtwo decks, so they can't like just use the Charizard GX attack to do 300 damage, giving you 310, so like you can't be knocked out right away. So I feel like there's definitely uses there.
Yeah, similar to Choice Helmet in Daytona.
For sure. John, what do you think?
I think Will got it pretty spot on with the nothing super outlandish with ADP will probably come up, or at least I think shouldn't. But just like niche text for like mirror, because the mirror match right now with that is very heavily oriented by like who goes first and stuff like that. So giving yourself an edge in the mirror is definitely going to be very important because there's going to be so much of it. But yeah, I definitely think the Big Charm, maybe Metal Core Barrier, and the Chaotic Swell are definitely super good counters for mirror.
All right, so that's where
Can I add to that before we move to
for sure.
point? Yeah, I definitely think I didn't talk about this earlier, but I think everyone I think going into the tournament, mirror is 100% going to be the biggest matchup like you guys were talking about. And I think the biggest thing is like deck knowledge, I guess. There isn't as solid like with this tournament coming up because you're talking about, there's 2 different kind of like schools of thought when it comes to the deck. There's like the Guzma Hala version, and then there's like the Energy Spinner version, but there's also so many different options. Like there's all these different tools people can play in stadiums and scoop ups and things like that. And because there's like so much variance in like how you can build your deck, the like optimal mirror is really hard to get down, right? So you can like play Shrine and Big Charm on your ADP, and you can attempt to knock out your opponent's ADP with like a couple Shrine ticks and stuff like that. But you never know who's playing like Lysander Labs and who's playing Scoop Up, and they can scoop up their own ADPs before you can really take a knockout on them. So it's I think the hardest part about building the deck is just figuring out kind of what techs are going to be best for mirror. Because on paper, it looks good to have like Big Charm, and I personally like Metal Core Barrier a lot. But at the same time, there's always people trying to get an edge in mirror in any way they can. That might be if you play 5-6 different ADP decks, there might be 4 different ways that people attempt to beat you, and only 1 or 2 of them might be like your build might be optimal against. So I think that's gonna be really hard going into this tournament, is finding like the perfect card for every single tech you're gonna see for mirror.
Sure. No, that definitely makes sense because, I mean, if you're going to play ADP Zacian in Toronto or even in your locals this weekend, like, you're very likely to see multiple opponents playing the same deck. So it's going to be tough, I think, for people to kind of come up with the best ways. And like you said, it's like, do your techs for like what a standard list looks like end up being good against what other people's techs look like whenever you play those mirrors? So yeah, we'll see how it kind of shapes up. So moving on, of course, ADP Zacian did get 3 of the top 4 spots in Malmo, but the 4th place, of course, was Sander Wojcik. And if you guys have known Sander over the last few years, he always plays these like mill or control, stall, wall, just all these types of decks. And he always has his own little twist on things. And so his list for this weekend was pretty similar to like what we've seen from Cinchino Mill, but the strategy kind of changes back to what I felt like Pidgeotto was earlier on at the very beginning of the season, where he's focused on hand control with Mars and Chip Chip Ice Axe. So we can kind of lump 2 decks in together here, talking about just regular Cinchino Mill. Of course, 2 did make top 8 at the Melbourne International Championships, or I guess, well, 1 made top 8, 1 also made top 8, but ended up getting disqualified. So it's a definitely still strong archetype, but I don't think that just regular Cinchino Mill saw quite as much success in Malmo as it did in Melbourne. So yeah, well, just kind of lumping these 2 decks together, wall, control, mill, whatever you want to call it. What are your guys' thoughts on these decks heading in or moving forward in the standard format, and which do you like better, hand control or just more aggro, Mag Cargo GX, Beloba, all that stuff? We can start with John for this.
I'm definitely not a huge fan of just straight up Cinchino Mill. I never have been. It's like when I've played it, it seemed pretty inconsistent, like early. And yeah, Sander definitely surprised me with the hand control thing coming back. I think one of the biggest problems with the deck is, especially in a like regional format, like I think the only reason that deck did well is because it's Sander playing it, and Sander is extremely good with like control archetypes and stuff like that.
For sure.
I feel like if the average player pulled up with something like that, they would stumble at some point to like ADP. Like with a deck like that, eventually you're gonna just like not draw amazing against ADP, and ADP is just gonna like run you over. And I feel like that can happen pretty often. So I'm not a huge fan of like the stall decks going into this one, especially with ADP being the biggest deck, because I feel like that. I mean, the matchup is like all right, but it doesn't seem that amazing, especially because they have the other Oranguru, they have Zacian V, Intrepid Sword. I just feel like it's the deck itself is good. It's just not the right situation for it right now.
Sure. Will, anything you want to add there about the Cinchino decks?
I think that the Cinchino Mill deck is super linear, and I'm personally not a fan of that archetype. As for what Sander played, I think hand control is in a pretty okay spot. For that regional specifically, it wasn't expected or anything, so it's possible Sander got a little bit of an element of surprise on some of his opponents to bring that concept back. Now that Pidgeotto has seemingly fallen off the face of the earth, I think that Crushing Hammer right now is really strong, and I think that Guru looping Crushing Hammer is super strong. So I do think that Sander's list did play Crushing Hammer, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I would imagine that that's probably a contributing factor too, is because the Cinchino Mill kind of aims to sit behind dolls and then use the supporter Belelba to mill the opponent's deck, and that's pretty much the only strategy, is just get their deck to 0. Where what I would imagine Sanders' deck is similar to Pidgeotto, where you Crushing Hammer, you spam Crushing Hammer, you keep resourcing Crushing Hammers, and I just think Crushing Hammer is very strong right now. So I personally like Sanders' deck.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, moving on. Frank, thoughts on the Cinchino decks?
I think it was a lot better early on in the format. It was really well poised going into Australia, kind of the first big tournament where Sword and Shield was legal, just because people hadn't really like figured it out yet, I guess, and especially like those cups kind of beforehand, that was just winning consistently. But now that it is like a staple in the format, you can kind of build your deck around it, and like Will was saying, it's just so linear that you either a lot of the time just win or lose based on how your opponent plays and not what you're doing. And then to touch on what John had said with the more control style, like the hand lock and things like that, I think that was really good in the hands of Sander, like you're saying. But to do well with a deck like that, especially in a format with like ADP, just being able to take 3 knockouts and having, consistent draw, that being the most popular deck, you just need to log hours and hours and hours into your control deck. And I don't think a lot of people are going to have the time to do that in between this tournament until Toronto, which is this weekend, and just the sheer willpower to play that much control, because I know I don't.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if you were, so this is another question here from Twitter at Bob McDougall asks, best way for Cinccino Mill to deal with Ninetales team up? Is it a few copies of Stealthy Hood or Soul Rock and Lunatone from Celestial Storm? So if you wanted to play Cinccino Mill, I think obviously the Reshiram Charizard Ninetales deck can definitely be an issue, since they can kind of get around the dolls with Ninetales' ability. I almost said Bright Look, but I don't think that's what it's called. What do you guys think? Is having Stealthy Hood or Soul Rock and Lunatone, are those decent answers to something like that?
There is no way you have the bench space for Soul Rock and Lunatone.
Sure.
I second that. Yep.
Yep, I agree. That was going to be what I said.
So if you want an answer, it's got to be the Stealthy Hoods, it sounds like. And
if you're concerned specifically with like the abilities art deck itself, you probably want to play Wobbuffet as well, along with Stealthy Hood, if you want to like shut off the Big Teeny Prism Star as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like a must if you're worried about that deck, for sure. And then also adding on to that, effectivenesses of Aerodactyl GX as a Mew 3 counter. So a lot of the Mew 3 decks, of course, playing Stinger GX Naganadel right now, and that Stinger combo combined with Baby Blacephalon's Fireworks Bombs is pretty tough for the mill decks to be able to deal with. And I think that's something we saw pop up, was people playing Aerodactyl GX as a response to just put a fighting energy on the Mewtwo and then GX knock out their Mewtwo for the game. Do you think that is an effective answer to that counter strategy?
It's 50 times, right? That's what the Aerodactyl's attack is?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you do 300.
And then you copy it with your own Mewtwo.
Yeah. So you're hitting for weakness, yeah. So that you're doing 150 times 2 for weakness.
Okay, so... actually, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do they do if they just slap a weak guard on Mewtwo before they sting him?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the issue with it. But, I mean, it was something that people had played in the deck, the Aerodactyl. Maybe just kind of as, like, the surprise factor, I guess. Maybe it's less effective now that people know about it, right? Because that does seem like just assault, like you just throw a weak guard energy and you don't really have much to worry about.
I think the reasoning for the Aerodactyl GX, I could be wrong, was that the Mewtwo Malamar deck that was super popularized pre-OCIC, and I would assume this is why James Cox played the Aerodactyl. Mm-hmm. That deck did not run weak guard energy, and then towards Mewtwo Welder list kind of just came out of nowhere. People weren't really talking about it. So it's possible that he was trying to counter the Mewtwo Malamar deck with Stinger Baby Blown, and that was what he came up with. And then when Towards deck was popularized, it played the double weak guard. So as long as the player is piloting that deck, or now that tournament is passed, if people realize this, they weak guard their Mewtwo. And if you hammer it, or if you hammer the weak guard, you're no longer one-shotting that Mewtwo. So the weak guard is kind of like a very hard counter to the Aerodactyl.
Sure. Oh, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Good against Mewtwo Malamar, not so good against Welder Mewtwo. Okay. So I think that's a pretty good transition into the next one, deck I wanted to talk about, and that is going to be Mewtwo variants. Of course, Nico did win Melbourne with the Welder Mewtwo, but looking at Malmo, there were no Mewtwo decks in top 8 of the tournament. And then I also want to take this time to talk about Mewtwo Malamar a little bit, because I think it was definitely a very hyped up deck coming into this format, but it has really not performed at all at either of the 2 majors so far. So which of the 2 Mewtwo variants right now do you like, and do you have any thoughts as to why none made top 8 in Malmo? Do you think it's definitely still tier 1, tier 2 deck in the format right now? So yeah, just kind of general thoughts about Mewtwo Welder and Mewtwo Malamar. Frank, why don't you kick us off?
I honestly think that Mewtwo Malamar is still like kind of slept on a little bit.
Okay.
I don't think it has like the performances to kind of back up how good the deck is. I think it's like high tier 2, like in between kind of tier 1 and 2, and I definitely think it can secure a top 8 spot. And it's just one of those decks that you can kind of build it however, because Mewtwo can copy like so many different attacks that you can kind of adapt it to the format very easily. And just the fact, you can let your opponent take one turn and then immediately get off the Marnie and discard their hand too, and that's really hard to come back from. I think it's not as strong as like the expanded Trevnor Milotic deck that we saw, but it's like still that same strategy of just like getting your opponent's hand down before they can really get much off. And especially with ADP in the format, it's this deck that takes 2 turns to even start doing damage. They're not doing damage till like turn 3. You can kind of just mitigate their strategy early on and just kind of cheese out wins like that. And I think that's a lot more powerful than it looks on paper, like with how the last couple tournaments have been.
Okay. Will, thoughts on the Mewtwo decks?
I think the reason they underperformed individually, I think that the Mewtwo Welder deck most likely underperformed because people knew that it was now like a known thing. So because it won the most recent event, people likely were like, hey, this deck's pretty good. We should probably counter this. Towards list, I have it right here. I played 2 Metal Frying Pans, and that can make it really difficult for the Mewtwo deck to one-shot the Zacians and stuff like that. And one of the game plans that you can take against Mewtwo Welder, if they can get off to a slow start, or depending on how well they match your speed, you can GX for 1 energy to give yourself the plus 30 effect, and then it makes one-shotting the Mewtwo's a lot easier. So if you can, with Towards List, if you Frying Pan your Zacians past that, it makes it difficult for the Victini V to one-shot your Zacian. So then the whole, like, they go 3-2-3, win the game, or with the, the tag team, then the 2 prizers and the tag team win the game. That strategy no longer works because the Victini doesn't one-shot Zacian. So, or you go tag team Zacian V, you being able to one-shot their Mewtwo's and them not being able to one-shot your Zacians, it works out in your favor. So I think that's probably why a lot of the top players decided to play Metal Frying Pan. And then as for the Mewtwo Malamar deck, I've put a lot of time into this deck before Australia, and then after Australia kind of dropped it. It had a lot of inconsistency issues, and then as we built the deck more, it kind of worked out those kinks, and it became a overall like more solid deck. But we ended up just favoring other decks over it because we didn't think the power level was there that we thought it once had.
Okay, sure. So now with, it seems like most ADP Zacians, like if they do imitate Towards List, playing the Metal Frying Pans, does that make it much harder to play Welder Mewtwo right now for Toronto and this weekend?
I would say so, unless the Mewtwo deck wants to add Lysander Labs.
Okay. John, what are your thoughts?
I pretty much agree with everything Will said. Mewtwo has a lot of inconsistency problems. Mewtwo Malamar did, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like Frank said, the strongest part was the Trevnor with the Marnie, which it can work out. It can also just hit you right back in your face because you just don't hit anything. So that's pretty much how I felt about Mewtwo Mally. I tested that a fair amount for Australia as well. Kind of tested that leading up, and then afterwards kind of dropped it because I was kind of just like, this deck seems pretty mediocre compared to everything else. And then as for Welder Mewtwo, despite aside from the fact that it's a Welder deck and has those like natural inconsistencies, like Will said, ADP can have the package to pretty much deal with it pretty well, to leave it like probably slightly favored for ADP. And having a slightly neg matchup to ADP is probably not something you want going into this. You probably want to be able to hold your ground against ADP. So yeah, I just don't think Mewtwo is very strong right now in general.
I'm gonna slightly disagree with one point that you guys made with the frying pan. So I think that Mewtwo Welder is still in a better position now than it was in Malmo, just because I feel like everyone is going to be so focused on teching for the mirror. Like you were saying with cards like Metal Core Barrier and like Shrine Vitality Band and these tools they're not going to be as focused on these fire decks, or you're having just Frying Pan in the deck. So I think that kind of gives like this small window for Mewtwo, Welder, or just like fire decks in general to kind of like overtake ADP just because they're so focused on the mirror.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that could happen for sure. So I don't know. We'll see how it kind of shapes up in Toronto. Okay, we'll move on here. A couple more decks that made top 8 in Malmo we're going to talk about. First off, of course, 2 baby Blacephalons, which only one in top 16 of Melbourne. Definitely, I feel like a deck that hasn't really had a chance to shine this format. It was really good in the Cosmic Eclipse format, but proving that it is still really solid with Sword and Shield. I think it's something that a lot of people were scared to play due to the rule change, not being able to, if you're playing the greens version, greens on turn 1, and then not being able to welder as well turn 1 is pretty bad. So it seems like greens is not the move, as both versions that got top 8 played Jirachi. What are your kind of general thoughts on Baby Blounds? Why was it able to find so much success in Malmo? And yeah, so we'll start with Frank for this one. Frank?
Well, I mean, it was piloted. One of the players that piloted at least was Stefan, who just is one of the best players in right now. And so I sometimes I feel like any deck in certain people's hands can do really well.
For sure.
But just Blacephalon in general, I think probably as far as ADP, which you expect to play a lot of, is concerned, that's probably one of the less favorable matchups. Like it's one of the few decks that can really get an upper hand on ADP sometimes, just because it has the ability to trade one shots, and a little bit faster. As turn 2 they can welder attach and start attacking if they really kind of draw the most optimal hand. So that is like one of the decks that can actually hang. And I think that is kind of why it saw success, because it's in this pool of decks of like ADP and Pikaram, I guess, that can really, get wins on ADP, which is like really kind of the defining thing of the format. Is can you beat this deck? So I think that just allowed it. And I think that, like you said, the way people built it, no one was really expecting the deck, and there are just certain people who will put enough time to kind of find like the most optimal way to play the deck. There's like one lucky egg in there, I think, but they also had like Oricorio GX and a lot of different things that maybe there's Kramer in there now. Just like a lot of those different cards that people really wouldn't have thought of when you look at like the last time that Blacephalon was successful. So I think that kind of just allowed the deck to break through, is that the fact that they had like the best version to play the deck, and that it could really do well amongst these other popular decks, and people also weren't expecting it.
Yeah, I feel like Cramorant's a pretty big card for the deck, because you can take 2 prizes for 3 energy, whereas previously you would need 3 energy plus however many energies in your hand with Fireworks Bomb to take the knockout. So I feel like Cramorant's a pretty big piece. And then the Victini V as well that Stefan played. Lucas, who also got top 8, did not play the Victini V. That seems like also another just kind of like alternate attacker that's pretty solid for the deck from the new set. John, what are your thoughts on the Baby Blounds lists?
I think the Baby Blounds is one of those decks where like it has good matchups against like the big few decks, like the tag team attackers, and then it just like really, really loses to like the fringe decks like Spell Tag Mally, Obstagoon, and like Mill and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like one of those things where you have to like pick and choose your matchups. It definitely has more polarizing ones. I do think it's pretty strong going into Toronto, just because it's one of the only things that boasts like a pretty good matchup against ADP. But even then, like Stefan was taking L's to ADP, and like that, which is a testament to how amazing ADP is as a deck. But, like I think the only deck that I've seen have a better win rate than like ADP against ADP is Baby Blounds. So if you're super worried about ADP, then that's probably your go-to.
Definitely fair. Will, anything to add about Baby Blounds?
I really dislike Baby Blounds as a deck. It could just be a personal preference thing, but Stefan and I talk every once in a while, and he's been trying to pitch me Baby Blounds many times. He did it before he won his regional with greens, with the greens deck, and I just believe that deck has a really tough matchup to reset stamp. I know that Oricorio helps you draw out of it. There's Heat Factor. There are various cards that help you draw to reset stamp. But a lot of the time in testing, I've experienced that a reset stamp plus a slow start, or just a reset stamp in general, can set me back multiple turns. But I do think that Stefan had the best list for that event, and I know he put a lot of work into it with the Japanese research that he did to figure out all that information. Also, another reason that he could have done well is in round 10 and his matchups, he's hit Tord, and Tord played no copies of Reset Stamp. So that allows him to just hold his hand, and I don't think he did, but if he hit any of the other players playing Tord's list, that could have been another reason for him having wins. And like John said, it comes down to matchups too. If you dodge your bad matchups, you can hit good matchups that will give you a better edge in that. So I think that it's a kind of a draw-based deck, but I do recognize its strength. It's personally not a deck I like.
Definitely fair. Okay, and moving on to the last deck from top 8 of Malmo this weekend was Pikachu and Zekrom Tag Team. This is a deck that, as long as it's been out, has been very popular, been pretty strong, and didn't have a top 8 finish in Oceania. I also wasn't really a huge member of the top 32 decks. John here did get top 16 with it, but the highest finishing Pika player in Melbourne, but then 2 come back and make top 8 in Malmo. So we'll start off with John for this one. Just kind of thoughts on Pika right now heading into Toronto and moving forward in the standard format, and we'll let you also respond to this. You already responded to this one on Twitter, but Isaiah Bradner asks on Twitter, custom catchers or Pokemon catcher in Pika, and Volkner or Cynthia in Pika. So thoughts on the deck in general, and then also on those kind of 2 card choice spots.
All right, I'll get into why Bradner's wrong later. But as for Pikarom, I definitely think it's in a worse position than it was in going into Australia, because I think in Australia people just wanted to play inherently good decks because people didn't really know what to expect. So at least with me playing Pikachu, I was just I made my list super based around getting the turn 1 if you're going second full blitz, or turn 2 if you're going first full blitz. I made it super consistent, just trying to make sure my deck was inherently strong. It definitely has a slightly negative matchup against ADP, which is a little unfortunate. But overall, against pretty much everything else, it does all right. Baby Blounds is rough. Spelltag Mally is rough. Mill is rough. Its matchups aren't that
does all
great.
Right. This is rough. This is rough.
It's honestly, if I'm being real, I have no clue how those 2 made top 8 at Malmo.
Yeah,
because its matchups just aren't there right now. As much as I hate to say it, because I really like the deck so much. I just think one of the main things it has going for it is it's consistent, and it has a lot of options with the attackers it can use. It has a really good one-shot potential with the Shuju, and with Coco V, it gave it a way to consistently do high amounts of damage, which usually with Pikachu you do a crap ton of damage for 1 turn and then reset stamp afterwards and try to just win the game from there. But now you can actually dish out a lot of damage a lot quicker with Coco V.
Yeah.
But I just Pikachu's not it right now, dude. But as for customs versus Pokemon catchers, number 1, flipping coins. I hate flipping coins. No, we're not. Pokemon catcher is just not good. Custom catcher is also a really good draw card. I had a lot of situations come up over the millions of tournaments I played Pikachu too, where drawing those 1 or 2 cards has definitely either won me the game or gotten me out of a sticky situation. Also, just the synergy with Volkner to get the guaranteed gust effect with custom catchers is a lot better in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, you could play Pokemon catcher if you're feeling lucky, but usually with Pikachu, you need to gust once or twice to get through the game. So
yeah. Yeah, you talk about kind of the matchups, and like you said, looking at it, it feels like on paper a lot of the matchups aren't the best, but I do think Pikachu's consistency is a lot higher than most decks, especially with Quick Ball and research index and stuff now. It feels a lot better. And then also just the kind of options you leave yourself with, where you can Lightning Ride GX to take a big knockout if you need to. You can Tag Bolt to take 2 prizes or 2 knockouts in a turn if you need to, and then Coco V. I just feel even though on paper it feels its matchups aren't the best, the fact that it has that consistency and those options is probably what led to it still finding success in Malmo. Will, you've also played a good amount of Pika in the past. How do you feel about it currently, and what are your thoughts on the catchers and then also the supporter line?
Sure. So historically, I've liked Pikachu and Zekrom. As the season progresses and the format changes with rule changes and whatnot, I'm not as big of a fan of it. But I do think that saying its matchups are like rough for majority of the board isn't super fair to the deck, because in its defense, that's kind of how the deck has always worked. The deck has always had super close to 50-50 or unfavorable matchups, and then you use the consistency and the speed of the deck in order to make up those numbers. And I do think that that's something that Pika has going for it right now, is it is very easy to establish a turn 1 or turn 2 full blitz depending on first or second. And if you can just use that to pressure your opponent out of the game, a lot of the times they don't have response. Stuff like Mill can take a few turns to stabilize, and if you can, just get going faster than them and target those Shinshinos, they can stumble. So, Pika is a strong deck paired with Reset Stamp. You can try and put your opponent on a back foot and then just win from there. So I think that the best way to look at the deck is a lot of its matchups are 50-50s. More than like rough or bad or whatever, and sometimes your match is decided on how the first couple turns go. As for customs versus Pokemon Catcher,
Yeah, I'm just gonna 100% agree with Will there.
as for customs versus Pokemon Catchers, I think that I hate saying this, but I think Pokemon Catchers are better in this deck. And reason being is Pika wants to play aggressive, so if you're researching every turn, it can be a little difficult to manage custom catchers,
For sure.
unless you're playing like a resource, or sorry, Primate Wisdom, Oranguru
Yeah.
to kind of control that, but then that's a bench space that you likely don't want to have. So I do think there's that. And also, John lost a game on stream because of his custom catchers, where he top decked a custom catcher out of order and then had to research. So they do lose you games sometimes.
All right. Okay.
But
Just assume I would have put tails on the Pokemon catcher. So either way, I was losing that game. It's fine.
that's
Either
one
I'm
way to
losing
look
that
at
game.
it. Yeah.
So basically, like if you draw customs out of order or in the wrong times, they can't be used besides the draw card. And then with Pokemon Catcher, a lot of the times your deck is just like set up, attack, and it doesn't really matter what you're targeting, which it's not always true, but sometimes you're just trying to attack, and then Pokemon Catcher just gives you an option to guff something up, and unfortunately on a coin flip, I know, but it exists. And Volkner or Cynthia, I'm just gonna go with Cynthia. That's what I've tried out. That's what I've liked, and then it fits the Pokemon Catcher thing a little bit better, where I'm not trying to grab custom catcher all the time. So that's what I like. And Isaiah and I have messed with that build a lot, so we like custom catchers in Cynthia.
All right, and Frank, I know you said you agreed with Will. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I mean I literally just put it perfect. Like I can't add anything else to the discussion that Will didn't put there.
All right, so next deck I wanted to bring up is, of course, I think probably a fan favorite, and that is Obstagoon, getting top 4 in Melbourne, but not seeing as much success in Malmo. I don't think, none made day 2 in Malmo, so... Is that a product of people teching for it? Because as we've seen, a lot of the ADP lists and stuff definitely respected it a bit more, playing things like Mawile and like the heavier gusts and stuff like that. So is that a product of that? Is it a product of not that many people playing it, or do we just think it's not that great right now? I don't know. Thoughts on Goons? Why don't we start with Frank for this?
It just comes down to do you respect the deck or not? It's like this paradox of like, people are now playing, Mawile, and people are playing like Lysander Labs and Fion to get around a stealthy hooded Obstagoon that to reset Obstruct, and so then nobody plays the deck because these cards are in there to counter it. And then likewise, because no one's playing the deck, then people take the cards out of their deck to deal with it, and then the deck becomes good again because people aren't playing these cards to deal with it. And it's like it's just a conundrum of do you expect people to play cards to beat it or not? And if you do, then Goons is a great deck. But then if people are going to get complacent and not respect the deck and assume people aren't going to bring it and aren't going to play it, then the deck can I thrive or not? And I don't know. There's not much more to it than that.
Yeah. So do you like personally feel like is that something you can see yourself playing? Do you like it or?
I change my answer every day. I like I'm always like, oh yeah, no, Mawile, everyone's talking about Mawile. All the Obstagoon players are gonna be scared. Like I don't need to tech for it. We're not gonna see it. And then next thing I know, it's like, oh, so and so got second at a cup with Obstagoon. I was like, oh no, and it's I don't know. I think I might put like a soft counter in my deck, just in case. But also for Toronto specifically, I expect to play it maybe once, and if I lose maybe one round and just win all my other ones because I'm not wasting space in my deck, with cards that aren't going to do stuff other places, then I'll take that. It's just
Yeah.
There's a term for it I can't think of, but yeah.
All good. Yeah. All right, Will or John, either of you guys have anything you want to add about goons before we move on?
Nah,
John, you can go if you want.
Spot on. It's just a matter if you respect it or not. I personally, for one, would never play goons. I just don't think that's very good. And then two, going into Toronto, I probably won't heavily counter for it. I don't expect very much of it. And if I hit one in round one and lose to it and go down to the pits of the goons at the bottom tables, then oh well, bad tournament. But I'm definitely not going to try to dedicate too many spots to beating it.
For sure. Okay.
Sorry,
go ahead, Will.
So I've noticed something common as a trend with me as a player, and I've started to notice that I like to play decks that don't let my opponent play the game. And Obstagoon naturally is a deck that is
looking guy over here.
Yeah, Keldeo
Or
GX,
just Trevenant it by itself.
Dusknoir, regular Trevenant, etc. So Obstagoon and Vileplume too. So Obstagoon is a deck that naturally kind of speaks to me. You go, hey, if your deck has no answer to this, I'm going to win. So with Obstagoon, unfortunately, its effect is not as broken as like Vileplume, Burning Shadows, where it's just like no attacks. But so there are things in our format that exist to counter the flash ray effect, which I think that's pretty much what that is.
Yeah, it is.
So with Obstagoon having issues like counters, it's a stage 2. You have to set up stuff like that. I do think that there's an appeal to that deck, and I think one of the biggest problems that it has right now is people know it exists after it got top 4. Then it won the Puerto Rico, I want to say, special event.
Yeah.
So things like Alolan Muck GX can go in Mewtwo. Mawile in ADP, Oranguru even to an extent. So there's just a lot of things that as a Goons deck you need to incorporate. And I haven't worked with this deck much because its strategy is kind of simple. It's not a deck that you need to test necessarily to know how it works. So I've more been thinking of ideas that can make the deck better. And honestly, it's just I feel like there's too much going on because you can play Galarian Rapidash to kind of help the Muck problem. The Mawile thing, I don't think you can do that other than trying to thin Pokemon from your hand every turn. I don't think Virizion's very good, so I mean that could help if you just remove the Pokemon from your hand and try and set up Lone Goon that way. Then I guess Mawile doesn't do anything. But yeah, I do like the deck. I think it's possible it does okay, but I think that right now there are too many counters and it's too known for it to do well. And I think that's why it underperformed in Malmo is because people are aware.
Yeah, so maybe it's like the type of deck that it doesn't do well Malmo, doesn't do well Toronto, people stop playing counters for it, and then it kind of pops up at regionals later on in this format.
Yeah, so say EUIC didn't get canceled, like that would be the tournament that I would put. If it were a bet, I'd probably put money on Obstagoon showing up at what would have been EUIC because it's down the line. People are now countering it, and if it doesn't show up, it might go away, come back, stuff like that.
For sure. All right, so coming up on an hour here, so in the interest of time, we do have a few more decks I want to bring up and at least somewhat address. So what I'll do moving forward here is just throw it to one person to kind of give their full thoughts, and then after that, if anyone has anything real quick they want to add, we'll feel free from there to do that. So next up, wanted to talk real quick about Reshizard, Firebox, Ability Zard, Reshi Tails. The deck has had many names, I feel like, but just kind of this Fire Toolbox deck that Zach Lesage got second place at OCIC with. Didn't see very much success, I don't think, in Malmo. I know none made top 8. A few in day 2 though, it looks like. So what are our thoughts kind of on that list, or on that deck, and how it sits moving forward in Standard right now? John, I know it's a deck you've played a bit of, at least at the start of this season. So what do you think about Fire Toolbox?
I don't think it's very good right now. It's got like the welder problems. Also, it's a lot worse when it goes first. So if like a non-ADP deck catches on and makes you go first, one of the decks that can exploit that really well is Pikarom that I've noticed. So yeah, it's just like you've got like a bunch of things going against you. Also, like your Baby Blondes matchup isn't very good. One thing you do have is you probably, unless Mill has like Wob Stealthy Hood, you'll probably beat Mill. You're all right. Actually, I don't know. How does it beat Obstagoon? Has anyone tested that? Is that it doesn't beat Obstagoon? Okay, you don't beat Obstagoon, so that's probably that can be a problem. I just don't think I don't know why you would play Ability Zard right now over Mewtwo. So yeah, I don't know why you would play it over Mewtwo or just like any of the other big decks at this point, like ADP or something like that.
Quick thing to add, there's a trend with that deck. It always tops a major and then disappears. So
Yeah,
Worlds
even
topped,
with
disappear.
LAFC, it won,
LAC top, disappear. And this event top, not at the next regional. So I would assume it will follow the same trend until the next IC.
Yeah, fun fact, the deck has never made top 8 at a North American regional championship. So, I don't know, which is kind of odd to me since it's at the biggest stage has always done really well. But
yeah.
Okay. Next we'll go to just traditional spell tag Malamar, one prize Malamar. Saw some resurgence at Oceania, didn't do very much. None made day 2 in Malmo. Where do you guys think that deck kind of sits right now? Is it good in Standard currently? Frank, why don't you start this one?
I have been testing that deck. I got about an hour of games in with it, and I think it's very good.
Okay.
Yeah, I played 3 games with it. It's gonna win the tournament. No, it's better than I thought it would be. So I haven't played too much Standard. I went to a cup this past weekend, and there were a few Malamars there that did well. I think there was like a mirror match for the winning into top 4, and I think there were a couple of players in Oceania who played it, and I think like there was like a top 16, one or two top 16s, or maybe like a top 16 and top 32.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah,
I think the deck's okay. I think it is poised to do fairly well depending on how you build the deck. You have a good Baby Blondes matchup if that's something we're going to see a resurgence in, and I think it's another one of those decks that you can just take a lot of 50-50s. Like you can do well against Pikarom and a lot of these like fringe decks that I expect to play over 50% of my games against ADPization, but I think Malamar deals with like all of these other decks very well, and you can kind of build Malamar a lot of different ways, and that's one of the reasons I love the deck so much, is because you can always take things in and or put things in and take things out and build it to a way that really suits the format. And so I think if someone were able to find a way to get the deck to do really well against ADPization and put enough hours into the deck to just consistently do that, I think you can do really well. And currently, like in my testing, that's what I'm aiming to do. I've been hopping around between a bunch of different things, but I think the deck is not getting enough, I guess, credit where, not credit, but it's not getting enough respect I think that it deserves. The other thing, I think a lot of people that do play it or that have played it just kind of put in a Latios EX and just expect to get the what's the GX attack?
Clear Vision.
Clear Vision. You expect to get the Clear Vision off first before ADP and just win. And I think that's not always the case. Like I played against, as an ADP player, I've played against Malamar where they got the Clear Vision off, and then I just never benched an ADP and just went in with Station and like 6-0'd them because the deck can do that too. And I think a lot of players that have tried to do well with the deck can expect to just Clear Vision and win against ADP, which I think it needs a little more like finesse than that. And I think if you're able to do that, Malamar can do really well at this tournament.
Yeah, I think Malamar's also in a pretty good spot right now. It's a deck I've played a lot this season. I think I think that it's one of the decks that does it. I think like Clear Vision is a very big part of the ADP matchup, and if you can get Clear Vision off, it helps a lot, and it makes the match. If you Clear Vision turn one, I think the matchup does become favorable, especially if you play double Mimikyu, which is definitely what you should be playing right now, because two Mimikyu is super good against Zacian.
Do you guys think that it has best of 350 problems?
Not as much as it did. It used to. I think it was so much slower. Before I think Baby Blown helps with that a good bit, speeding up kind of your end game, and then also playing the double Mimikyu, and then depending on what GX you play, like if you play Solgaleo Lunala, like Danny played in to get top 16, that's another option to like one shot a Zacian. I think Gengar Mimikyu is a good potential option right now for the deck, so I think that it's way less. I think it's not as bad off in best of 350 as it was at the start of this season.
I think just the format in general is a little bit faster too.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Pikarom is, like you said, one of the fastest. You get turn 1 full blitz off. That's just like a super fast deck. So you're gonna be pacing with that, and you have ADPization, which is like winning the game in 3-4 turns. Sometimes, so you just, the format is fast enough where your games are decided so early that you can kind of like thrive with this Malamar deck. Or you can just 2-0 all your opponents,
Yeah,
and
just do that.
In the famous words of Michael Catron, just play faster.
I think if you know the deck really well too, like if you really put the time into the deck and you can make snap decisions like that, it can do well. Like you just are a good Malamar player, and you're not spending a lot of time making these like grandiose decisions. Like you can get the games done, but not everybody has time for that.
And I think another so it was like really good pre-Cosmic Eclipse. Post-Cosmic Eclipse kind of fell off in popularity, and I think a big part of that was Mallow and Lana, since you're really playing the two-shot game, and Mallow and Lana is a card that has not really been seeing very much play currently in this format, so I think that's another big help to Malamar currently. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like Malamar right now, but we'll see kind of what happens in Toronto. Okay, just a couple more decks here. I wanted to ask about Magcargo GX. Now, I've played a decent amount of PTCGO this week, and I think I've played just as many Magcargo GXs as I have ADP Zacians online. It feels like this deck is everywhere. A lot of people, I think it's like another one like Obsidian, kind of like a fan favorite deck. It's kind of like, has that roguish feel to it, but is really, really powerful as far as like its damage output. So kind of first popped up at the Internationals in Melbourne. Several Japanese players played it, one making top 32. So yeah, what do you guys think about Magcargo GX? I'll let Will take the lead on this one.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't have a ton of knowledge on this archetype, besides the fact that it can make itself a one-prize attacker, and that's pretty solid. It does a lot of damage.
Sure. We'll kick it. John or Frank, either you guys have something you want to say about it?
I can take this one. Yeah, I'll take this one. I like the deck a lot, actually. I wouldn't play it, but I like it. I like it a lot. I do like it. I think Island Challenge Amulet and just the deck being able to hit for an infinite amount of damage I say infinite amount of, it just, there's no damage ceiling. Like you can always do,
you can one shot anything.
Yeah, and I think that's really good. But I wanted to play it for a little while, but then when I kind of started thinking about it and just like boiling it down to the more, I guess, broader aspects of the game, I think that again, like when you're looking at ADPization, which is just, I think, the immediate wall you should be able to hurdle over before you even consider playing a deck.
Yep.
Even with the Island Challenge Amulet, like assuming they don't play Lysander Labs or anything, you are taking 2, maybe 3 prizes on them, and they're taking 2, maybe 3 prizes on you. And I think after they use their GX attack, they're just doing it a lot more efficiently.
Yeah, you are a stage 1 still, and like having to set up multiple to really get to that. Like you have to have you need the smooth over in play to consistently get through your deck, and then you also need like multiple GXs in play at a time to get your energy acceleration to hit your damage numbers every turn.
Yeah, you need the welder and the attach and like GX abilities, and just being able to set that up. And I mean, the decks were playing like 4 Great Ball, 4 Quick Ball, Calm Evolution Incense, like a good like fourth of the deck was just dedicated to like Pokemon search cards. Then there's not a lot of room to like, get fancy with the deck and kind of like build it to a way where you can kind of like mitigate any bad matchups you have. And so I think that the deck is just too, I think, simple to like thrive in this format right now. I think it's cool, and I think it's like it can be a good deck. But like the problem with Obstagoon, it's like a known entity now, and I think people can kind of easily just play to beat it.
Sure. All right, so that is all the decks that I had for us to talk about, and I think that is everything that has made day 2 at the past 2 tournaments. So with that being said, as we close things out here, I want to ask the group, give me 2 decks that you think that you would expect to win Toronto Regionals, and neither of them can be ADP Zacian. So 2 non-ADP Zacian decks that you could definitely see winning Toronto. Will, John, and then Frank.
Okay. I think I can see Mewtwo winning Toronto just because it's a strong deck, and like Frank said earlier, if people focus their text otherwise or other places for mirror or whatnot, it can kind of slip back in with placements because of whatever stuff is just more effective than it was. It has outs to the Cincino Mill deck, and it covers its bases pretty well in terms of matchups outside of the top decks. And then the other deck I could see winning, maybe winning is not the right way to say it because of the style of the deck, but doing well for sure. I think that Sanders deck, whether that's how he played it or an innovative concept, I think that could do pretty well too.
Bro, stole both my answers, bro.
And I only say that because of time constraints. Like you can get cheesed in top 8 or whatever due to the time. So that's why I didn't say winning.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Those decks always have had a hard time in Top Cut for sure. All right, John.
I definitely think a Baby Blacephalon could like high roll through the tournament, just hitting like all like Picaroms, ADPs, and like Mewtwo's and stuff like that. So that I definitely think Baby Blowns could definitely pull it out. And then for my last one, I have to agree with Will with Mewtwo, because it doesn't like it's an inherently powerful deck, and it doesn't like straight up just have like an auto loss to anything.
Yeah, definitely.
So it has like it has the potential to beat anything. So I feel like a good player piloting Mewtwo, or someone who knows what they're doing rather, piloting Mewtwo could go far and even win.
And Frank.
I'm just gonna 100% agree with Will here. I think he put it perfectly. I think Mewtwo has a really good window right now where everyone is so caught up in ADP mirror and ADP this and ADP that Mewtwo can kind of just like slip through the cracks, sort of like how you're saying with the like Firebox deck or the Reshizard deck, where it just will pop up and then do really well, and then people will kind of play towards it. I think Mewtwo has a really good window right now to kind of just slip in and win. And then the same thing, with Sanders deck, it's just you can put hours and hours into like making the perfect lock control kind of stall deck for this format that is like solidifying now. And it definitely, you can just win the tournament just based on the fact that you kind of have this deck that has an answer to everything, just how all control decks kind of work. But anyone who's able to put the time from possibly before Malamo, or just like seeing Sanders deck and putting time in from Malamo to Toronto to do well with the deck, like power to you. But I don't see that happening. But in an alternate universe, like that would win the tournament for sure.
And all this is irrelevant because we know ADP Zacian is going to win the tournament anyway.
Yep.
So no. All right. Well, hey, I really appreciate everyone's time tonight. We did run pretty long, over an hour here, but I hope you guys who are watching definitely enjoyed and got some good information. I'm going to give these guys a chance as we close things out to do any sort of plugs, shout outs, anything like that. We'll go Frank, John, then Will.
Wasn't ready for that.
We can start with John if you want.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right, John.
All right, shout out to my sponsor, NRG. Shout out to Six Prizes. Make sure to check us out. Shout out to my main testing group. And yeah.
There we go. Will?
Shout out to my sponsor, Ultimate Spice Gaming. Shout out to my sponsor, the PTC Geo Store. Shout out Brett Burns. Shout out my main testing group. And yeah. I'll see everyone in Toronto.
There we go. And Frank, you ready now, bud?
Sure. Yes. Shout out to Team Gas, who has no financial sponsor obligations, but if you're interested, feel free to just run in the DMs there. Please follow me on Twitter at PokePercic. There might be an underscore there. I'm just gonna double check on that.
I have our Twitter handles all on the screen right now, so yeah.
All right. Is it on the left or right?
It's on your left.
This.
That would be your left. There you go.
The way follow me on Twitter at PokePercic.
There we go.
And that's it.
There we go. All right, guys. Appreciate everyone watching, and thanks to Will, John, and Frank for coming on. Definitely be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more Pokemon TCG content, and follow all of us on Twitter. So, thanks everyone for coming. Have a good night, and until next time, take care.